Matt, what recommendation would you make regarding our school's attendance policy?
There are some common errors that I found over the years with attendance policies throughout our state, and some things that I'd encourage you, some changes I'd encourage you to make, which I would consider best practices. One of those best practices would be to make sure that you clarify that school officials have the final say on excused absences. One of the common errors that I'll see is that school officials will state something in their policy that a student will be excused upon a call from a parent, or a student will be excused upon notification of a parent or a guardian that a student is ill. What I would encourage you to do, and what I would consider a best practice, is to list a number of factors that school officials will consider when determining whether an absence is an excused or an unexcused absence. Now, one of those factors may indeed be, and I would encourage it to be, a call or some type of communication from a parent or a guardian. But again, see this as a factor that you're considering, and make sure that it's very clear in your policy that school officials will have the final say in determining whether or not an absence is considered excused or unexcused. Now, another misstep that I've seen over the years is that we have some schools in our district that include both excused and unexcused absences together in determining consequences for missing school. Iowa law does not permit school officials to consider excused absences when determining attendance consequences. So again, make sure that you have that separation between excused and unexcused absences. A student should not be penalized for any reason for an excused absence. Now, having stated that, if you have a student who has a high number of excused absences and you wish to have a meeting with the student and the family just to make sure that everything's all right with that student that's in that student's family, that's certainly appropriate, and that might be a wise step to take to try to assist that student and that family. Now, another practical step that I'd encourage you to make in coordination with other schools and school districts in your county is to coordinate the number of days of required attendance. Now, the number of days of required attendance of students is critical when trying to determine whether or not a student of compulsory attendance age is truant. And by coordinating the number of days of required attendance with other school districts in your county, this greatly eases the job of the county attorney with whom you're going to work on truancy issues, so that county attorney will know that in his or her county, every school district requires X number of days of attendance, so that that county attorney and his or her staff will be able to assist you as best as possible.
Matt, what actions do you recommend when students of compulsory age are failing to attend school and are unexcused?
And the first point I want to make on this one is, and this is not only for students of compulsory age, but I'd say it's all students, is to ensure that parents or guardians are promptly informed of the absence. We actually just had a case here in Iowa, the Iowa Supreme Court case, which found that in certain instances, school districts may be found liable if harm comes to a student and the school district did not take the appropriate steps to inform the parent or the guardian that the student is not present at school. So that's the first point I want to make. Next, early in the process, coordinate a meeting with the student and parents or guardians. So get together with that student, meet with the student, and you might start with just a student meeting, and then if there are additional absences of that student of compulsory age, then meet with the parents as well to again find out what might be going on in that student's life, what issues there might be, and what the school might do to be able to help the situation so that student has better attendance. Now, for students in 6th grade or below, if the student is truant, so the student has missed beyond what they're permitted to miss as far as required days of attendance, you need to ensure that you set up an attendance cooperation meeting. And out of that attendance cooperation meeting for that 6th grade student or younger, there would come an attendance cooperation agreement. Finally, consider sending a letter to the parent or guardian explaining possible ramifications if the student remains truant. Now, one of the things I believe would be effective is to actually photocopy a portion of the Iowa Code which states some of the consequences that parents or guardians may face if their student remains truant. This includes fine, this includes potential jail time, and so this is something, by sending them a copy of that code section, it may let them know how serious the matter is and hopefully will cause them to take some additional action so that their student has better attendance in your school.
Matt, what steps may we take when a student is beyond compulsory age but is having unexcused absences from school?
Until a student turns 18 years of age, one of the options that we have is that we may contact the Department of Transportation and let them know that the student is failing to attend school. The Department of Transportation at that point may suspend or potentially revoke that student's license so they will not be able to drive in the state of Iowa. So that is some leverage that you have by using the Department of Transportation. Another option is to communicate with federal and state agencies regarding financial assistance that that student or that student's family may be receiving. In some situations, federal and state law requires for students to be in attendance at school for families to be receiving aid, or for that student to be receiving aid from the government. So I'd encourage you to look into that, and in some instances that might additionally provide leverage and encouragement for that student to be attending your classes.
Matt, what other practical considerations should school officials consider when a student is not attending school?
The first practical consideration I'd consider is, what is the purpose for the absence? What's behind that student not being at school? It may be that the student is facing concerns about bullying. The student perhaps is afraid to be at school. Perhaps the student is embarrassed about something that's been going on either at school, or maybe it's something that's going on outside of school hours online where others have been teasing or making fun of that student, and now the student is too embarrassed or too afraid to attend school. So I'd encourage you to be very proactive in communicating with the student and the student's family and trying to get to the bottom of the attendance issue. And next, I've mentioned this already, make sure that parents are notified of the student's absence. So I want to just reiterate the importance that in any instance that a student is absent and you have not received prior notice from the family that the student is going to be absent, that we want to make sure that we're communicating with that parent or guardian.
Matt, may an 18-year-old excuse themselves from school?
One of the common questions I've received over the years is whether or not an 18-year-old student may excuse herself from school. And the answer that I'd give to that question is maybe. And you say, well, gee, that's not real helpful. But I say maybe because that student who's 18 years old, you may permit that student to excuse him or herself if you find the student to be reliable. Now, back to excused or unexcused absences, again, you have the final say. School officials have the final say in determining whether an absence is excused. So if you find that 18-year-old student to be a reliable student, then yes, an 18-year-old student may call him or herself in absent from school, and that may be considered an unexcused absence. However, I want to be clear that on the other hand, if you're finding that that 18-year-old, 19-year-old student is abusing that opportunity to call in that they're going to be absent from school, then you may make the determination that the call from the student, him or herself, is not enough, and you may expect that there's some other call from another individual who you do find reliable, or in some instances you may require for that student to come in and see the school nurse to determine whether or not the student is ill.